Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? If you asked any kid who grew up in North America after 1969, they'd probably tell you how to get there, who you'd see, and what time to see your favorite puppets like Big Bird and Elmo. Needless to say, Sesame Street was and remains to be a safe and wholesome household favorite not only for the children who enjoy it, but for the parents who trust it and their messaging. Recently, in collaboration with CNN, Sesame Street conducted a town hall to address recent protests and global outcry against police brutality and anti-Black racism.
We are a collective of Canadian educators who are Black Indigenous people of color working to dismantle all forms of oppression within our schools and communities. Our goals are to teach the language of inequality, create space to interrogate racism, and teach all stakeholders how to take action.
In this podcast, we unpack the town hall as it relates to the following topics: fairness, naming race and racism, hurt people, never too early to talk about race, importance of language, and Black Lives Matter. And we offer some next steps and activities, so listen to the end.
Sesame Street isn't new to addressing social justice issues. Throughout the airing of the show, they have addressed racism, hair, skin color, homelessness, foster care, grief, incarceration, COVID, and so much more.
We are mindful, though, that we can't passively consume the messages being delivered. We have to be critically conscious and question the information we are being provided. While we may love and trust the Sesame Street, it is imperative we look beyond the surface. Hi everyone, I'm Tamla, and I'll be talking to you about fairness. In the following clip and throughout the town hall, we will hear the words fair and unfair used regularly. This makes sense and is developmentally appropriate, as young children understand concepts of fairness very well. They have a deep sense of what's fair and unfair and will not hesitate to let you know. Ideally, though, the conversation will not end at fairness because we do not live in a fair and equal world.
People are upset because racism is a huge problem in our country.
Racism? What's that?
Oh, racism is when people treat other people unfairly because of the way they look or the color of their skin.
As you can see, discussing fairness is a great way to enter discussions surrounding issues of social justice, such as racism. Elmo's dad defines racism as people treating others unfairly because of the color of their skin, which is, in its most simplest of definitions, correct. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary for Kids, racism is a belief that certain races of people are by birth and nature superior to others, and or discrimination or hatred based on race. We need to extend that definition, however, in the context of North America and most westernized countries. White supremacy is a form of racism that is practiced. It is the belief that white people are superior to other races and should be dominant over them.
I've heard about equality and equity, especially in our school. What's the difference? Why does it matter?
Equality means same. It assumes we're all starting at the same point and should be treated the same. It seeks to promote fairness, but it's only fair if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same level of support.
Equity aims to give everyone what they need to be successful. It focuses on equality of outcomes. This involves taking into account structures which might put particular groups at a disadvantage. We'll get to these structures when Danielle helps us explore and understand the Black Lives Matter movement.
Remember, equality aims to promote fairness, but it can only work if everyone actually starts from the same place and needs the same thing.
That's right. Equity might seem unfair, but it actually moves everyone closer to success by leveling the playing field. It is important to acknowledge that we don't all start at the same place or have the same needs. This graphic neatly expresses this. It also demonstrates that equity allows us to see that the unequal conditions people might experience are the result of systems and practices of inequality, such as racism, bias, and prejudice. Equity seeks to remove these barriers so we can all truly be free.
And what better way to close this section on fairness than to end with Audre Lorde's words, "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences."
Hi, my name is Kizreen, and I'll be talking to you about naming race and racism.
That's a great question, Elmo. And, sometimes when somebody's got brown skin like me, we work just as hard as everybody else, but we get paid less money. And, sometimes a police officer might think somebody's a bad guy just because that person's got dark skin and then doesn't treat them very well at all. Now, that's not all police officers, but it does happen too much. And, it's just not fair.
In this example, we see how difficult it really is to talk about race and racism when we don't name or identify the social groups who are advantaged and disadvantaged by it. White and non-white people specifically, in the context of the United States, where this town hall takes place, during the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and the current Black Lives Matter protests.
I am so proud of them, Van. That's the first thing I want to say. And my message to them is just keep being who you are. Keep loving each other. And when you see someone who's doing something wrong or saying something wrong, say that it's wrong. Make sure that when your friends sometimes do things that they shouldn't do, that you say to them, that's not right and you shouldn't do that. And say it with love and just lead by example.
Leading by example and using our voice is so important. Mayor, it's so great to have you with us this morning for this conversation.
The host, Van Jones, as well as the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, are both African Americans who struggle to articulate clearly that Black people are being treated unfairly because of white supremacy.
One of the children in the town hall asked, if Black people contributed so much to the development of this country and the world, why are Black people treated so badly? Why do you think this is, Kizreen?
This is an excellent question, Tamala, that can only be understood by naming white supremacy and knowing the impact of the history of Black people's enslavement during colonization and the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, the mayor later acknowledges that this unique history must be recognized when addressing issues affecting Black people, such as Black Lives Matter. Black people's contributions are devalued as a result, and the contributions of white people is what we hear about or see represented in the education system and the media. When Van Jones says, we work just as hard as everybody else, he means that Black people work just as hard as white people, but are discriminated against in the workforce. According to Statistics Canada's 2016 census, Black Canadians had a high unemployment rate of 12.5%, almost double that of white Canadians, who had a rate between 5.3 and 7.3%, even though they had the same socioeconomic status and level of education.
The children asked direct questions such as, how can we stop racism? And how can we stop it and stay safe? And the mayor's response was rather vague and simplistic. She did not specify how we can stop racism. Instead, she framed it as people needing to simply intervene and speak up when they see something is wrong and do what is right.
I agree, Danielle, that the mayor had an opportunity to provide a more insightful and instructive response, such as this. In order to effectively stop racism, we first need to learn what racism is and how it affects different groups of people, so we can identify it and name it when we see it happening, and then find ways to stop it. To stop racist behaviors, first, we, as individuals, have to change our worldviews to not value white supremacy and the lives of some people over others. Finally, communities, organizations, businesses, and governments would take the next step to change their practices that perpetuate racial inequalities.
That's why naming the oppression is the first step towards truly achieving social justice. According to the organization Racial Equity Tools, to name and frame racism is to explicitly and publicly use language and analysis that describes an issue as a matter of racial justice. In other words, you are addressing an issue for which racism is one of the root causes, and you clearly explain how people of color are disproportionately impacted by the said issue.
If we don't clearly talk and educate people about the existence of racism as a current and critical social justice issue, we will allow racist institutions to perpetuate the myth throughout society that racism is no longer relevant, undermining our ability to dismantle it.
Nayab here. So I'm going to talk about one of the quotes that, one of the things that the mayor said, which is hurt people hurt people.
Some people say that hurt people hurt people. And I think that's what happens when you see Black and brown people being treated unfairly. They're being treated unfairly by people who sometimes are hurting themselves and they may not even know why.
Yeah, very, very true.
We have seen this quote in a variety of contexts. Saying something like this when talking to children about race and racism is especially harmful to BIPOC children. Similar examples of spiritual bypassing, such as pray for them. This quote teaches BIPOC children that it is their job to be forgiving of racism, while the racist is not held to account. Furthermore, it reinforces the idea that BIPOC people must be stoic in the face of racism and oppression in order for them to be taken seriously. We have to cut our own humanity away in order for racists to feel comfortable.
When we as a society do not notice and name the issues of anti-Black racism, we are pretending that we don't see race, so therefore it will end. Being colorblind means that white people have under the surface racialization that makes it difficult for us to address these unconscious beliefs. Many white parents are choosing to refrain from having these difficult conversations in hopes to raise an anti-racist child. It is important not to see racism as a product of discriminatory thinking or acts, but rather as structures of inequality that are embedded in policies and procedures of institutions that we have. The takeaway here is that white privilege exists regardless of whether or not you have directly or indirectly discriminated against people of color. Be aware of the overt or covert ways you send racially charged messages to your children, but the most important message here is that you must talk about it.
And racism, because as I discussed earlier, not naming doesn't acknowledge there is a problem or the need for racial justice and equality.
We must educate racists and make them think about what they say. We have to teach children, all children, to detect racism and call it out, even if it means making people uncomfortable. They should call it out when you see racism or any other forms of oppression. You should call it out, name it.
Mayor, when you bring up Black families being unfairly targeted, we know that families around the country are having a lot of very important, very tough conversations right now. But for parents who are raising children of color, specifically Black children, the talk has long been a part of those conversations. You are a mother of 4. What do you tell your children?
Hi, my name is Caroline, and I'm going to talk about the fact that it's never too early to talk to children about race and racism. As a child, I grew up watching The Muppet Show. Today in Canada, we have many immigrant Black and people of color children who are also not brought up watching Sesame Street Children. There are also some of these children who grew up not knowing anything about race or racism until they arrived in Canada, where some have gone on to face racial discrimination based on the color of their skin. These children never knew that the color of their skin mattered or that it would be used against them.
During the town hall, a parent wondered whether or not it was too early to explain to her kids what's going on. Her children are the ages 5 and 2. She was worried about whether or not discussions of race and racism would mess up their innocent little minds. How do you respond to this, Caroline?
To answer that family's question, and those of many others, I say it is never too early to talk to children about race and racism because children can see what is going on. So for those new immigrants, some of them are stressed about adjusting to a new country, a new school, and adding on racial discrimination just complicates it and further deepens the hurt, and in the process, it isolates them. For those Black, Indigenous, and people of color children who were born and raised in Canada, they too know about race and have experienced racism, be it in their communities, in class, on the playground, or on the school bus. All Black, Indigenous, people of color need to see themselves reflected in the books they are reading in schools. They need to see themselves in their curriculum, and they need to see themselves in their teachers and educators so that they can feel like they also belong and matter. All children, regardless of race, need to know how they can disrupt racism when they see it and disrupt the attitudes and barriers that discriminate against Black, Indigenous, people of color just because of the color of their skin.
I think it's important to start with history and start with context. You don't want to get on a pedestal and go through a whole soliloquy about the whole entire history of our country, but you do want to start with people were brought to the United States as workers, as slaves that were unpaid, and that was not fair. And they were treated really poorly. And those people are Black people that have come from countries in Africa. And then you can start to build on that conversation to paint to where we are right now and how this has been something that's been going on for years and years and years, centuries. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing now.
My name is Gurpreet, and I'll be discussing the importance of our use of language as it relates to the terms slaves and workers as they were used in the town hall. The reality is, history books are written by those with access to resources and power, and if we're being critical, it is often a benefit afforded to those with white privilege. On the opposite end of that, it denies others from telling their versions of what actually occurred, often those that were in the situations that didn't get to tell their actual versions of what happened. In the town hall, Dr. Heard Garris from the American Academy of Pediatrics discussed the need to share history with our children as early as 2 years old by stating, "You do want to start with people were brought to the United States as workers, as slaves that were unpaid, and that was not fair. Let's stop here. We know now more than ever about the importance of how important and hurtful language usage can be."
An infographic shared recently on our Facebook page, Teaching Beyond the Surface, highlighted the following points about the differences between the two terms. When we're referring to the word slave, we're talking about dehumanizing a person and making it seem like it's a part of their natural identity. On the other side, an enslaved person allows the word person to remain, giving them and maintaining their sense of dignity, reminding us that we're speaking about human beings and that it was a condition one was forced to endure, not a natural disposition.
Yes, and it is important we make it clear that this narrative constructs enslaved Africans as immigrants who, on the other hand, have, although limited, choice to migrate due to push and pull factors of global capitalism, for example. In fact, Ontario's current social studies curriculum refers to Black Canadians in early Canada as simply slaves and not the correct term enslaved. Problematic phrases abound in the curriculum, such as refugee slaves and migration of African slaves.
So this also connects to a 2015 article that was published by Yanan Wang. There was actually a teacher in Texas whose son read a similar version to that referenced by Kizreen, where they spoke about the Atlantic slave trade between the 1500s and 1800s that brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work southern United States to work on agricultural plantations, as if it was a choice that they embraced. Share this infographic far and wide, and also help yourself learn and unlearn the incorrect usage of this terminology. I'll be very honest, as a part of my unlearning, I recently just learned about the importance of the difference between the two. It's a lifelong process for all of us.
Daddy, Elmo doesn't understand. What's happening? Why are all these people together?
Oh, well, they're gathering together to protest.
Protest? Papa doesn't understand. What's a protest?
A protest is when people come together to show they are upset and disagree about something. They want to make others aware of the problem. Through protesting, people are able to share their feelings and work together to make things better. They make signs like this.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm bringing this sign to the protest at the community center later.
Oh. They look upset. Are the protesters sad?
They are sad and upset, and they have every right to be, Elmo.
My name is Danielle, and I will be talking to you about the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement as it relates to protesting about anti-Black racism all over the globe. As we uncover equality and equity in terms of what that looks like, the Black community is demanding we be treated as such. For well over 400 years, Black people have been living in a world where systems such as law and education have reared their ugly head, showing that these systems were not created for Black and marginalized communities. White supremacy has made it so that we will always be othered and not seen as comparable to our white counterparts. Today we are beginning to see a modern-day civil rights movement happening. We are taking back our power because enough is enough. Elmo made a great parallel between the streets we walk every day and Sesame Street, where culture and race is valued and appreciated. If only it were that easy.
For those wondering, Danielle, do you have any stats about the prevalence of this issue?
Statistics and news stories show that in 1 year alone, 722 fatal killings took place in the U.S. by police, with 3/4 of them being Black, while Black people only make up 13% of the U.S. population. In Canada, a 2018 report done by the Ontario Human Rights Commission showed that Black residents in Toronto are 20 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. For us, the streets of our reality mean living in fear as we go about our day-to-day lives. Here are some examples of being on the street while Black. Trayvon Martin. He couldn't walk to get Skittles wearing a hoodie. Timur Rice was deemed a threat just playing in the park. DeAndre Campbell was in need of mental health supports and they killed him instead. Regis Korchinski-Paquette, whose care was mishandled by police. All of these innocent people died because our society fears Black skin. We cannot live in the colorful world we want it to be until we take accountability and dismantle our institutions that allow these senseless murders to happen at the hands of law enforcement. In which Black communities across Canada and the United States can actively dismantle all forms of anti-Black racism. Black Lives Matter was created by 3 female organizers as a political movement responding to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman. This movement is an opportunity to come together to support our brothers and sisters in communities that are mourning the loss of individuals of Black violence. More so, it has become a platform and organizing tool to help propel the conversation around anti-Black racism. Now they have chapters globally to make change in communities where Black people are systemically and intentionally targeted for demise. When we talk about dismantling, I'm referring to the learning that Elmo's dad talks about. It's time to support one another and take action.
Here are some action steps that you can keep in mind as you go forward in this work. 1. Read, read, read. No time to read? Listen to an audiobook or a podcast. We've provided reading suggestions on our social media platforms.
Number 2, be courageous enough to call out racist comments or behavior you see. Don't make excuses for racism. Learn to identify it and call it out.
Number 3, learn about the terminology as it relates to anti-racist and anti-oppressive work.
Number 4, name race and racism.
Number 5, keep learning and unlearning.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. Please be sure to visit our social media platforms, complete the family activity, and share it on our various platforms. You can reach us at our email at teachingbeyondthesurface@gmail.com, through Instagram at teachingbeyondthesurface, on Twitter at teach_beyond, or through Facebook at teachingbeyondthesurface. Don't forget to use hashtag teachingbeyondthesurface.
Oh, what a lovely day. precious dream. To be young, thinking and wild. Open your heart to what I mean. In the whole world, you know, there's a million boys and girls who are young, gifted, and wild, and not so bad. We must begin to tell our young. There's a world waiting for you. Yours is the quest that's just begun. When you're feeling real low, yeah, there's a great truth that you should know. When you're young, gifted and right, you're so intact. To be young, gifted and black. Oh, how I long to know the truth. There are times when I look back and I am haunted by my youth. But my joy of today is that we can all be proud to say, to be young, it's where it's at, it's where